When the fishermen got lost on the river, search and rescue teams couldn't find them for 8 hours. Then the old river guide took out his boat and found them in 45 minutes. "How did you know where they were?" they asked. That's when his 50-year secret would finally come out. This story will show you that sometimes the quietest people have the biggest experiences. Jim Wilson spent 50 years guiding fishermen to safe waters on the Mississippi River. He never bragged, never talked about his past. He just did his job. But that night, when 3 fishermen got lost in the storm and professional search and rescue teams couldn't find them for 8 hours, Jim taking out his boat and finding them in 45 minutes wasn't luck. Because those rivers, those dark waters, those dangerous channels, they weren't foreign to Jim. Many years ago, in a place far away, he had learned to survive in the same kind of waters. Hello. Welcome to The Last Stand. Do you have any sailors or Navy veterans in your family? Share their river or sea experiences in the comments. Jim Wilson was 75 years old, living in the small town of Riverdale by the Mississippi River. He'd been doing the same job for 50 years, river guiding. Every morning at 6, he'd walk down to the dock, prepare his old blue boat, and wait for the day's fishermen. Everyone in Riverdale knew Jim, but nobody really knew him. He was a quiet man. He'd talk to his customers just enough to do business, do his work, and go home in the evening. He lived alone. His wife Margaret had passed away 10 years ago. They had no children. Jim's only companion seemed to be the river and his boat. Jim had skills that nobody noticed. The most striking was how he knew the river like his own home. He never used maps, never pulled out a compass. Even on the darkest nights, even in the heaviest fog, he never got lost. "The river talks to me," he'd say when customers asked. People thought it was just an old man's joke. But Jim was serious. There were other strange things, too. Jim's boat was always in perfect condition. The engine never changed its sound, never broke down. It was like he had a special connection with machinery and Jim's reflexes. Even though he was 75, when dangerous situations came up, his speed was incredible. When the waves got big, when the wind picked up, Jim seemed to transform into someone else. November 28th, Wednesday night, a terrible storm hit the Mississippi River. Wind was blowing 45 miles per hour, waves reaching 6 feet high. That evening, 3 local fishermen, Tom Bradley, Mike Stevens, and young Danny Rodriguez, had gone out fishing late on the river. They were experienced fishermen but had underestimated this storm. At 9:30 p.m., Tom's wife Linda called the police. "My husband and his friends haven't come back yet. I'm really worried." The Riverdale Police Department immediately took action. The Coast Guard was notified. Search and rescue teams were organized. But the storm was so severe that helicopters couldn't take off. Big boats couldn't get on the river. The search continued all night. The Coast Guard's small boats swept the safe sections of the river. Police teams searched along the shore with floodlights. Volunteer fishermen did what they could. But the river was too big, the storm too severe. There was no trace of the missing fishermen. By 5:30 in the morning, everyone was tired and hopeless. Search and Rescue Coordinator Robert Hayes made a statement to the media. "So far, we haven't found any trace of our missing fishermen. We're expanding our search operation." Tom's wife Linda was crying. Mike's father had been taken to the hospital. Danny's young wife Sarah, 8 months pregnant, looked like she might faint from worry. Jim Wilson was at home, listening to the news on the radio. At 6:00 a.m., Jim walked down to his boat. He was calm and determined as always, but there was a different light in his eyes. Search and rescue coordinators and Coast Guard teams were gathered at the dock. Jim walked toward them. "Coordinator Hayes," Jim said. "I'm Jim Wilson. I've worked this river for 50 years. Hayes knew the old man. "Jim, this isn't the time for search operations. It's dangerous." "Where did you search for them?" Jim asked. Hayes showed him the map. "We swept these areas: main channel, safe coves, shallow areas." Jim looked at the map and shook his head. "You're searching in the wrong places. In this storm, with this wind direction, this current, they're not in the main channel. They've been swept into one of the side branches." When Jim took out his boat, it was 6:15 a.m. Hayes and his team watched curiously. Instead of following the river's main channel, Jim headed directly east, toward one of the side branches. He seemed as determined as if he knew exactly where he was going. 30 minutes later, in a small branch of the river, in a hidden cove among the trees, at the base of a fallen tree, he found the three fishermen. Tom Bradley was unconscious but breathing. Mike Stevens was shivering from cold but standing. Young Danny Rodriguez was going back and forth between fear and relief. Jim took them into his boat and brought them safely back to the main dock. Total time, 45 minutes. Coordinator Hayes asked in amazement, "Jim, how did you know where they were?" That's when Jim Wilson's 50-year secret would finally come out. "Experience," Jim said simply, but Hayes had question marks in his eyes. As Tom Bradley was being taken to the hospital, he thanked Jim. "Mr. Wilson, you saved my life. I don't know how to thank you. I just did my job, son," Jim said. But the way he said son reflected an experience much deeper than his age. Mike Stevens was alert enough to talk with Jim. "Mr. Wilson, how do you know so well which parts of the river are dangerous?" Jim hesitated. "I've been here for many years, Mike. The river taught me. But your way of moving was different, like you were running a military operation." Jim's face tensed. "Military?" "Yes. The way you handled your boat, your coolness during the rescue, your coordination skills. These aren't found in an ordinary river guide." The next day, the local newspaper headline read, "75-year-old guide finds in 45 minutes what professional teams couldn't find in 8 hours." Regional television stations wanted to interview Jim. But Jim refused them all. "I just did my job," he kept saying. But his refusal to give interviews created even more curiosity. People wanted to learn who Jim Wilson really was. Riverdale townspeople started asking each other, "What do you know about Jim's past?" The answer was surprising. Nobody knew anything. Bobby Martinez was Riverdale's retired police chief. He had served in the town for 25 years. He'd always been curious about Jim Wilson. "He's lived here for 50 years, but we don't know anything about his past." He told his wife, "He has a social security number, pays taxes, but there's no record before that." Bobby started investigating. He found records from 1974 when Jim started working. But there was no information from before that. It's like he started living from scratch in 1974, Bobby thought. The strangest thing was that Jim had no friends. He'd lived in town for 50 years but never formed close friendships with anyone. He was polite and helpful, but distant. Young Danny Rodriguez's pregnant wife, Sarah, visited Jim a week after the rescue operation. "Mr. Wilson," Sarah said with tears in her eyes, "I don't know how to thank you for saving my husband. Our baby would have grown up without a father." Jim was moved but didn't lose control. "Sarah, I just did the right thing. But how did you know so well where they were?" Jim was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Sarah, sometimes life teaches a person many things. I learned many things too." "What kind of things, Mr. Wilson?" "Hard things, Sarah. Not the kind of things a person would want to live through." Sarah noticed the pain in Jim's eyes. She understood that this old man carried very deep wounds. Tom Bradley, one of the rescued fishermen, had an investigative nature by profession. He was a retired journalist. Tom started researching Jim. He went through all the old records in Riverdale. He talked to neighbors. He found people from his old workplace and asked questions. The result was always the same. Nobody knew anything about Jim before 1974. When Tom dug deeper, he discovered something strange. There was no information about Jim's family, no marriage records, no family photos, no relative visits. Even his marriage to Margaret had started in 1975. And Margaret had told neighbors she never talked about Jim's past before meeting him. 2 weeks later, the Riverdale city government organized a ceremony to honor Jim Wilson. Coordinator Hayes, local Coast Guard representatives, and townspeople attended. "Jim Wilson," Hayes said, "the courage and skill you showed is admirable. Finding people that professional search and rescue teams couldn't locate in 45 minutes is extraordinary." Jim was still plain and humble as he received his award. "Thank you, but I just did my job." Hayes continued, "Jim, this kind of expertise isn't gained overnight. Your boat handling, your navigation skills, your rescue techniques, these require years of experience." "I worked this river for 50 years. Jim said, But Jim, what we see in you is more than river experience. You have military-level training. Jim's face tensed. The audience fell silent. Military training? Jim said, his voice trembling slightly. Yes, Jim. I served 20 years in the Coast Guard. I recognize people with military training. Your way of moving, your decision-making process, your crisis management. These aren't gained through civilian training. Jim was silent for a long time. Everyone in the hall was watching him. Hayes, some things are better left alone. Why, Jim? Is there something in your past to be ashamed of? Not ashamed, Hayes, but I don't want to talk about it. Hayes was insistent. Jim, we have a right to know. You've been part of this community for 50 years. Jim stood up. Hayes, you need to respect my privacy. And he left the hall. Tom Bradley didn't give up. He expanded his research. Federal records, old newspapers, military records. And finally, he found an important clue. In 1974, there were special rehabilitation programs for former military personnel, especially for soldiers returning from the Vietnam War. When Tom researched these rehabilitation programs, he learned something surprising. Some of these programs included identity changes, especially for veterans with severe PTSD. Could Jim be? Tom thought. When he researched more thoroughly, he found something else. A list of Vietnam veterans placed in the Mississippi region in 1974. The name Wilson James was on this list. But the records were classified. Tom researched the belongings of Jim's deceased wife, Margaret. Margaret's sister Helen helped Tom with this. Helen said, Margaret never talked about Jim's past, but she said some things during her final illness. What kind of things? She said Jim sometimes had nightmares at night, shouting river. But she didn't know which river he was talking about. Helen showed Tom the last letter Margaret had written. The letter was written for her sister, but was never sent. The letter said, Helen, Jim is a good man, but he's suffered a lot. He told me very little, but what he told was enough. He experienced very hard things in far places. I always supported him because he deserved it. Retired Police Chief Bobby Martinez used old connections to research FBI and military records. And finally, he found the critical information. Wilson, James A., Navy veteran, Vietnam War, classified service record, rehabilitation program 1974, 1975. Bobby learned that Jim was a Navy veteran. But which unit he served in was classified. Bobby contacted the Navy contact point. Can you release this information? Sorry, Mr. Martinez. These records are still classified. We can only release them if the veteran himself requests it. Bobby realized he needed to talk to Jim. Bobby Martinez went to visit Jim. Jim was in his yard, looking at the river. Jim, I need to talk to you. Jim turned calmly as if he knew Bobby was coming. Bobby, what did you learn? You're a Navy veteran, Jim. You served in the Vietnam War. Jim was silent for a long time. Then he said, Bobby, some things are better left buried. Why, Jim? Are you a hero? I'm not a hero, Bobby. I'm someone who survived. What do you mean? Jim looked at the river. Bobby, sometimes surviving is harder than being a hero, because survivors think about the lost ones every day. Bobby saw the pain in Jim's eyes. 50 years of pain. Tom Bradley's journalist connections paid off. A researcher working on Vietnam War veteran records found Jim's file. Jim Wilson, Navy Petty Officer, 2nd Class, Swift Boat Cruise, Mekong Delta Operations, 1968, 1970, 1 Bronze Star, Purple Heart recipient. Tom was shocked. Jim wasn't just a Navy veteran. He had served in one of the most dangerous units of the Vietnam War, Swift Boat Cruise. When Tom researched further, he learned Swift Boat Cruise conducted patrol operations in the rivers of the Mekong Delta. They were very dangerous missions. Crew survival rates were very low. He tried to learn how many people from Jim's crew had survived. Records were incomplete, but as far as he could tell, very few had survived. Tom Bradley went to visit Jim. He now knew the truth. Jim, I learned everything. Jim nodded. Tom, what do you think you learned? You're a Swiftboat veteran. You served in the Mekong Delta. You're a Bronze Star and Purple Heart recipient. Jim's eyes filled with tears. After 50 years, someone had learned the truth. Tom, yes, I served on Swiftboats, but medals don't matter. What matters is how many of us came back. How many came back, Jim? From my crew, just me. Tom understood Jim's 50 years of pain. Survivor's guilt. Jim, you fought to survive. This isn't your fault. Tom, you weren't there. You didn't see how my friends were lost in the Mekong. I remember them every day. With Jim's permission, Tom Bradley shared this story with the townspeople. The town of Riverdale was shocked, learning that the quiet river guide who had lived among them for 50 years was a Vietnam War hero. Everyone's perspective of Jim changed. He was no longer just an old man. He was a veteran who had fought for his country. But this was the hardest part for Jim. He didn't want attention. He didn't want his medals. He just wanted to live peacefully. Why didn't you ever mention it, Jim? Asked his neighbor, Mrs. Henderson. Henderson, some memories are too painful. I tried to leave them behind. But Jim, you should be proud of your service. Mrs. Henderson, pride and pain sometimes come together. When the story appeared in local media, the Navy Department took notice. A Vietnam War veteran affairs officer contacted Jim. Mr. Wilson, this is Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell. I'm calling from Navy Department Vietnam Veteran Affairs. Jim's heart raced. Commander, what do you want? Mr. Wilson, we've reviewed your service record. We'd like to organize a Navy recognition ceremony for your outstanding service. Jim was silent for a long time. Commander, I don't need a ceremony. Mr. Wilson, besides your Bronze Star and Purple Heart, you also saved civilians. Your service in Vietnam was exemplary. Commander, I just survived. My friends were the heroes. Mr. Wilson, survival is also a kind of courage. And serving your community for 50 years also deserves recognition. The townspeople decided on a special ceremony for Jim. A community ceremony to honor Vietnam War veterans. But Jim didn't want a ceremony. I just want to live quietly, he told everyone. Tom Bradley tried to convince Jim. Jim, this isn't just for you. This is for the town to recognize Vietnam veterans. Are there other Vietnam veterans? Jim, you're not alone. But you're the only visible one. Others are living hidden like you did, Jim thought. Maybe it would be helpful for other veterans. Tom, let the ceremony be private, just townspeople. After Jim's story spread, other Vietnam veterans from Riverdale and surrounding towns also came forward. Robert Hayes, search and rescue coordinator, revealed that he was actually an Army veteran himself. Mike Stevens, one of the rescued fishermen, said his father was a Navy veteran. Mrs. Henderson's deceased husband turned out to have been an Air Force veteran. Jim's story had created a domino effect. Townspeople began learning each other's hidden stories. Jim, said Tom Bradley, you didn't just share your own story. You started the whole community's healing process. November 30th, Wednesday, the Jim Wilson Honor Ceremony was held at the Riverdale Community Center. Besides the townspeople, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell came from the Navy. Other Vietnam veterans from the region also attended. For the first time in his life, Jim wore a dress uniform. After 50 years, he wore his Bronze Star and Purple Heart medals. Commander Mitchell said, James Wilson, 50 years ago you served your country exceptionally in the Mekong Delta. You served in the most dangerous missions of Swiftboat crews and saved your comrades' lives. 50 years later, you showed the same courage by saving people in your community. The Mississippi River may be different from the Mekong, but your spirit of service remained the same. Jim stood at the podium and looked at his community. It was time to say the words he had hidden for 50 years. Friends, I hid my past for 50 years. Because it was too painful. My friends I lost in Vietnam, Tom Martinez, Mike Rodriguez, Danny Williams, Bobby Chen, they're with me every day. I didn't forget them. I never will. But you showed me that hiding isn't healing. Being a community, supporting each other, honoring each other's stories, these are necessary for healing. I'm now proud both for my Vietnam service and for serving my Riverdale community for 50 years. And I promise you, I won't hide anymore. As veterans, we'll support each other. After the ceremony, Jim's life changed. He was now at peace with his past. He established a veterans support group in Riverdale. Every Wednesday evening, veterans gathered to share their experiences. Jim's river guiding business also changed. He now took not only fishermen but also veterans and their families on river tours. The Mississippi River has healing power. Jim would say, flowing water takes everything away. It takes pain away too. Tom Bradley made Jim's story into a book, The Swift Boat Guide, a Vietnam veteran's 50-year journey home. The book became a national bestseller and became a source of inspiration among Vietnam veterans. When young Danny Rodriguez's wife Sarah gave birth to their baby, she called Jim with the news. "Mr. Wilson, our son was born. We're naming him James in your honor." Jim was moved. "Sarah, this is a great honor, but it wasn't necessary. Mr. Wilson, you saved my husband's life. Now, our son will grow up with his father. James Wilson Rodriguez. Let him carry the name with pride." A year after Jim's story came out, Riverdale held its first official Veterans Day ceremony. A Vietnam Veterans Memorial was erected in the town square. The memorial also had the names of Jim's crew, Tom Martinez, Mike Rodriguez, Danny Williams, Bobby Chen, in memory of the Swift Boat crew. "This memorial isn't just for me," Jim said at the opening of the ceremony. "This is for all my friends who couldn't come back." The Navy Department offered Jim a special proposal to be a mentor for young veterans. Commander Mitchell, "Jim, you went through a rehabilitation program when you returned from Vietnam. Now, can you share your experience with young veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan?" Jim accepted. He did group therapy with young veterans at the VA Medical Center twice a week. "Gentlemen, I lived in silence for 50 years, Jim would tell them. "Don't waste this time. Talk, share, ask for help. We have community behind us." Jim's story was so impactful that the Mississippi River Veterans Foundation was established in Riverdale. The foundation's purpose was to organize river therapy programs. Veterans went on river tours, accelerating their healing processes by connecting with nature. After Jim's story appeared in the media, an unexpected phone call came. "Uncle Jim? This is Michael Wilson, Bobby's son." Jim was shocked. Bobby Wilson was Jim's younger brother. Jim had cut contact with Bobby before going to Vietnam to protect his family. "Michael, how's Bobby?" "Uncle Jim, Dad died 15 years ago, but he always talked about you. He'd say, 'My Jim got lost in Vietnam.'" Jim reconnected with family after 50 years. Michael had 3 children, Jim's great-nephews and great-niece. "Uncle Jim, the kids want to learn about their great-grandfather's heroism." When Jim had a reunion with his family, he felt complete for the first time at age 75. The war's separation from family had healed after 50 years. In 2024, on Jim's 76th birthday, the town of Riverdale organized a big celebration. Governor Patricia Williams issued a state proclamation. James Wilson Day was declared. Every November 28th would be celebrated as Jim Wilson Honor Day in Riverdale. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell made a special presentation. Jim was given the Navy Distinguished Public Service Award, the highest Navy honor given to civilians. "James Wilson," said Commander Mitchell, "your service is an example not only to the Navy but to the entire nation. 50 years of silent service, followed by years of mentorship and healing. This is what makes America great." 2 days after the celebration, Jim went on a final river journey alone. He went to his special spot that he had visited every day for 50 years, the quiet cove by the river. He sat there and talked to his friends, Tom Martinez, Mike Rodriguez, Danny Williams, Bobby Chen. "Guys, I'm at peace now. I felt guilt about you for 50 years. But now I understand. There was a purpose in my surviving. I survived because I needed to serve others. This community, veterans, my family. You gave me this mission. I'm now proud both of my service and my life. Rest in peace, brothers. I completed my mission." At sunset, Jim returned home. For the first time in 50 years, he felt completely peaceful. If these powerful stories appeal to you too, don't forget to subscribe to the Last Stand channel. We'll continue bringing you more hero stories every day. Jim Wilson is now 76 years old, still living in Riverdale and mentoring veterans. The Mississippi River Foundation has helped more than 500 veterans in their healing process so far. And Jim still goes down to the riverside every morning, talks to his friends, and continues serving his community. Service never ends. Jim says, "The war may be over, but the mission continues. Helping, serving, healing, this is our duty." Jim Wilson's story shows us that true heroes live quietly, but come forward when the right time comes. And sometimes the greatest heroism is starting to heal after 50 years,